take questions of Mr. Cutler. I don't want to holler.
No?
I don't want to be ugly.
Okay.
It is good. All right. We're going to get started. You don't want to miss it.
Okay.
Know who their representative is.
Lynn's coming next.
Okay.
Lynn and Cutler.
Anybody who gets up, I was giving them 5 minutes. Gonna
That's
know what
it.
to give them.
You got it. How are we doing on time?
You want to do it?
You know, anybody know what time it is?
Quick announcement, about 5 seconds.
All right, we're right dead on time.
A quick announcement.
Okay, we're almost dead on time right here, so let's stay on schedule.
We need
Wait.
a quick announcement.
All right, we've got a couple of quick announcements we'd like to make. I think you noticed, if you saw the brochure, we expected Senator Lee Bright to be here, but he got caught up in New York, couldn't get a flight out or something, but he couldn't be with us tonight. And Representative Gary Smith out of Greenville County, he wanted to be here, but he couldn't make it tonight either. But they wanted us to know they're on our side. They're going to fight this. And we have one more announcement that Mr. Harvell.
Ms. Diane Hardy, who is over here at the table, wanted me to make note to you that if you do not know who your state representative is, she can point you in the right direction. So anyway, Diane Hardy has done many good things over the past few years. Registration by party with the state Republican Party and things like that. And anyway, she's a great lady, and she and her cohort, Stacy Shea, do a wonderful job in this. And if you'll see her, if you don't know who your representative is, very important, see Diane right over here. Thank you.
All right, good. All right, I had one more story to tell, but they told me I can't. We're too close on time. So after Lynn speaks and after Mike Cutler speaks, we'll take questions, but we're going to wait and take them at the end. Michelle, come introduce Lynn.
Okay, I'd like to introduce my sister in Christ. My son's best friends with her son, and she's a wife, a mother, a homeschooler, and she also was a public school teacher for 8 years. And so she'd like to talk to you tonight about the biblical perspective of refugee resettlement.
Jim and Michelle wanted me to speak to the evangelical clothing that this has been wrapped in, because as you know, it's the evangelical community, some of them, who brought this here, and it's been likened to the Trojan horse that brings the enemy right into your midst. And one of the pastors in our area, Larry Bateman, he pointed out that the Great Commission says, "Go ye therefore and teach all nations." And what our modern evangelicals have decided is they would rather bring, because there's some personal benefit for them in this. And before I say any more, it's an insignificant fact about me, but it's very important to say for this speech, I am an evangelical. More specifically, I am Southern Baptist. My father is a Southern Baptist pastor. We used to plan our vacations around wherever the Southern Baptist Convention was going to be every year. I've been very involved in the Southern Baptist Church all my life and know very well that it's not perfect, but I've always felt like it was the best thing, the closest to the biblical model of what God wanted the church to be. I've always defended it vehemently despite its imperfections. And then about 2.5 years ago, I had a great reckoning, and I was devastated because I heard that many of the evangelical leaders, particularly Southern Baptist leaders in our state, were pushing and advocating for the Gang of Eight bill back in 2013. And most of us recognized that it was a whole nother version of comprehensive immigration that gives amnesty right now and a vague, unqualifiable promise of securing the border sometime in the future. Just trust us. And it's a very important, critical piece in the leftist progressive agenda, the one world order, guys, to subvert the United States, weaken it, and make it so that we are not a factor, and progress that agenda forward. So that was hard for me, and they were doing these radio ads, and it would say at the end, this ad is funded by the Evangelical Immigration Table. So I needed to start researching the Evangelical Immigration Table, and what I found when I went to their webpage is many of the groups that were participating in it did not have anything evangelical about their mission statement, their goal. Christ was nothing of interest to them. Instead, they were touting causes such as social justice and redistribution of wealth, and that's readily recognized as communist speak. And the guy, I researched more, and the man who started it was a man named Jim Wallace. And he does not use communist code speak. Jim Wallace embraces communism and proclaims it just openly. And the Communist Party USA gave a huge shout out to him in 2010 when they reestablished their religion commission, which was formed for the purposes of co-opting evangelical leadership. It recognizes how massive the numbers of evangelicals are, how important it is to get this group on board with communist causes. And it gave a huge shout out in that paper to Jim Wallace for all that he has accomplished so far towards this end. And I was reminded of the scripture, Matthew 10:15, about the false prophet who is a wolf in sheep's clothing. And we've all known Satan always dresses up in nice clothes and uses nice terms such as social justice and redistribution of wealth. That always sounds great, but when you dig a little bit further, you see the groups that embrace these principles. I've already said communists. Islamic Sharia law embraces social justice. Fascists embrace social justice. The Nazis in Germany did, and I really liken what we're seeing here in the United States with evangelical leadership to exactly what we saw in Nazi Germany. And people wonder, why were so many Germans subdued and just letting this happen? And that is because the church leadership in Germany had been co-opted by the Nazis. And if it sounds a bit far-fetched to compare that to this, I'll tell a story because a lot of people don't realize when the German soldiers came and after they took away the Jewish family to the firing squad or the gas chamber or the concentration camp, wherever it was, there was another team that came in after them to seize all the property of the Jewish people that had been removed and taken out of their homes. And this was a very desirable assignment if you were one of those people. And one such person that did this, he was a very young man then, an older man now. His name is George Soros. A lot of people recognize him as somebody who has said openly he wants to bring down the United States. He openly advocates one world governance. They don't realize he got his start in Nazi Germany and has said he has no regrets about that time in his life. It was the best time of his life. He is also the person that funds the Evangelical Immigration Table. And the IRS 990 form has been dug up, and that's public information. Kelly Kohlberg in Ohio founded a group called Evangelicals for Biblical Immigration to counter the Evangelical Immigration Table, and she's done wonderful work there. And it's important work as we fight this because the church leadership in our country looks to benefit tremendously off of increased immigration of all types, and they are advocating it more and more. As the American church shrinks, instead of our church leadership asking, is it because we gave over our charitable role to the government? Is it because we no longer take care of the poor? We've turned that over to the government. Is it because we turned over our duty to educate over to the government? Instead of asking those questions about why is our church shrinking, they've begun going to the government and asking if they will fund the programs under the guise of Christian charity. I'm looking in Christian magazines such as Christianity Today, and I see ads by seminaries. And by the way, the heads of most evangelical seminaries and many of the professors are featured prominently on the Evangelical Immigration Table website. It's very much the wave of the future. They're offering degrees that are geared towards helping newly immigrated people. And it has a picture of the young seminary grads surrounded by children in the international community. This is their future, and it's going to be big money for them. And the question is, in regards to refugee resettlement, how much? The resettlement agency that's located here, there are 9 contractors. 6 of them are government affiliated, and are religious affiliated. The one that's located here in Spartanburg is World Relief, and it's being billed as a great evangelical effort. What they don't tell you is on the DSS website, it says if you accept government funds, you cannot proselytize. You must demonstrate fair hiring practices, including to the LGBT community. It's a very fraudulent thing that's going on, and they get paid per head, which to me is one of the more troublesome things about it, because they're going to always be motivated to advocate more and more as long as they're paid per head. Right, and the latest figures I found in 2010 it was 700 per head, but I believe it's almost 900 now. How much? Right, but not all that goes to the contract agency. They keep... Okay, so I heard Jason Lee, who heads World Relief here in Spartanburg, on the Terra Servatius show a few months ago, and, she questioned him about, this is going to be big money for you, and he said, well, by the time you pay the office rental and the phone bill and these 60 refugees, $750 per head, this is not a lot of money. And he's right. When you do the math that way, it's not that much. But he just forgot to mention a few things to Ms. Servatius on the radio that morning. One thing he didn't mention is that the program increases every year. If it goes on the normal trajectory of all the other refugee resettlements across the country, it gets increased every year. And sure enough, this coming year, we're supposed to get 100. I'm going to bet a lot of money it'll be more than that, because they're adding the Syrians into what they've already planned to bring. He also forgot to mention that the resettlement agencies resettled the asylees that come here as well. And asylees fall under the same law, the 1980 Refugee Act, which was introduced by Ted Kennedy, signed into law by Jimmy Carter. The asylees are people that make it to our borders and then apply for asylee status. And Obama's been handing that out down on the border like cotton candy at a circus. It's one of the main ways he's getting these people to be legal, is he's giving asylee status. And we've been seeing them packed up on buses and sent all over the country, and we've been wondering, where are they sending them? They're sending them to the refugee resettlement agencies. That is who processes them once they get their asylee status. So on top of the refugees, they're also going to be processing many of these asylees. He forgot to mention that. He also forgot to mention, failed to mention that the family members of everyone that is given asylee and refugee status are then able to come over on a visa program. And his office will be processing what will end up being thousands of those as well. So you see the dollars, big time money to be made for the resettlement agency, and the taxpayer is stuck holding the bill, not just for the resettlement agency, but our state and local funds, because as refugees, they get full benefits. I mean, coming as a refugee and asylee is really the best way to come as a legal immigrant to the United States. I know that you guys want to get to Michael Cutler, so I'm just going to not say much more. I do want to say one more thing in regards to it being billed as this great evangelical effort. What we see everywhere these resettlements are set up is not a lot of new churches. There are a lot of new worship centers. It is a lot of mosques. In Utica, New York, I spoke with somebody from Utica. He happens to be a former CIA agent who confirmed that, yes, vetting is very impossible with these guys. But he said he went back to Utica a couple years ago after being away for 20 years. And he was so looking forward to seeing downtown again. And he turned the corner to see this beautiful cathedral that's always been a centerpiece in downtown Utica, and he could not believe it. It was a mosque. So that's what we're seeing popping up in all these places where there is refugee resettlement. The program is run by the UN, and I don't want to get, I think I'm going to stop because I think that Mr. Cutler will cover all that. And so y'all would much rather hear from him. Yes.
It is my honor to introduce Michael Cutler, who is uniquely supposed to be here. He is absolutely the one who is in this country, who is I think, the best expert to talk about this issue. And if Nikki Haley and Trey Gowdy and Lindsey Graham and Mick Mulvaney and all of our state legislators and the county council, after what they've heard so far, will not immediately call for a cease and desist of this refugee program here in South Carolina, I believe that after this testimony that's going to be recorded, that they absolutely will. And so it is just, he won the case for Lou Barletta and Hazleton and done so many things. Here he is, Michael Cutler.
Thank you so much. Actually, you should be applauding yourself, I have to tell you. To come here tonight, on Sunday night, and see a packed room like this gives me a sense of warmth that I can't begin to tell you. I've traveled halfway across the country and have walked into a room with 35, 40, 45 people. To see this turnout blows me away. And I thank all of you for being here. I thank all of you for taking your citizenship responsibly and seriously. And if anybody thinks that individuals can't make a difference, I just want you to think of something. If I mention moments in history, the American Revolution, the First World War, the Second World War, you name it, it's only a handful of names that history remembers. The few people who stood up and made a difference in that moment in history when their action was essential. So when we hear, well, I'm only one person, what can I do? Think about General George Patton. Think about General Eisenhower. Think about those individuals who stepped forward and made all the difference in the world. Every one of us has the potential if we're willing to make the effort. So I just want to thank you, first of all, for being here. And I want to tell you that we've been talking about refugees, and I happen to be Jewish. My grandmother died in the Holocaust. I was named for her. And when I was a B'nai B'rith president, and if you're not familiar with the B'nai B'rith, it's a Jewish service organization. We did all sorts of great work. We worked with charitable organizations. We worked with, I'm trying to remember Danny Thomas's hospital that we collected tons of money for, St. Jude's Hospital. And so I was very proud to do that. And we went to Washington, and this was during the era of LBJ, to try to convince President Johnson to get the Russians to allow Jews and other religious minorities to leave Russia, come to America, or go to those countries that would have them. And it was amazing as an immigration inspector, because I began my 30-year career with the old INS as an immigration inspector assigned to Kennedy International Airport in New York City. And there's a word in Yiddish, the term is mitzvah, a good deed, to sit in that booth and admit refugees, and these were legitimate refugees. They came in, they fell to their knees, they kissed the floor, they kissed me, they were crying, I cried with them because I thought of my own family and how they were decimated. My first wife passed away because of cancer 30 years ago. Her mother was in a concentration camp, you know. So when you see honest refugees, you know that these people were carefully vetted. They were coming to America. It was as thrilling for me as I think it was for them to be involved in the process. But today, that's not what we're talking about. We don't know who we are admitting. And first and foremost, if our government errs, it needs to err on the side of the safety of the citizens of the United States of America. In 1993, our country suffered 2 terrorist attacks. First, in January 93, a guy by the name of Mir Al-Milkansi shot up the CIA. He was a citizen of Pakistan who had applied for political asylum. And he decided to use his access to the parking lot at the CIA compound in Virginia to shoot up the place. He killed 2 CIA agents, wounded 3 others, fled the country. We brought him back here, put him on trial, found him guilty, had him executed subsequently, but it didn't bring back the dead. A month after that attack at the Trade Center, at the CIA, we had the first attack at the World Trade Center, again involving Middle Eastern men who came to the United States and gamed the visa process. And they were here in the United States, and they did not run the Mexican border. And I'm making that point for a reason, and we'll get back to that Mexican border issue momentarily. Some of these individuals had actually applied for and received political asylum. Ramsey Youssef, classic example. He walked into Kennedy International Airport with a bogus passport, said the magic word political asylum, and we gave him asylum ultimately. He was a guy who did inestimable damage. We had a guy, Mahmoud Abu Alima, who got agricultural amnesty a la Chuck Schumer. Chuck used to be my congressman. He was never my representative. Even though I'm a registered Democrat, we had some pretty heated arguments, he and I. Of course, Anthony Weiner, or Mr. Weenie as I called him, was his protege. My son worked for him as an intern, and boy, I could tell you stories about that. But the point was that Mahmoud Abu Alima got agricultural amnesty, allegedly having planted beans in a farm in Florida. The only thing he ever planted was a bomb in the garage of the World Trade Center that ultimately killed 6 innocent people, injured over 1,000 people, almost brought the tower down sideways. And for folks who live in a rural area, it may be hard to imagine a building that stood over 1,400 feet tall, almost a quarter of a mile into the sky, 110 floors, tens of thousands of employees. Had it come down sideways, as horrific as 9/11 was, this would have been a level of damage that's hard to even comprehend. The wall that kept out what they call the seawall, the bathtub that kept out the Hudson River, probably would have been breached. Lower Manhattan would have been flooded. This would have been a catastrophe unparalleled in the history of the human race. And the Clinton administration did absolutely zero. I did my very first congressional hearing May 20th, 1997, on the issue of visa fraud and immigration fraud because of those terrorist attacks. The concern was that our visa process and our immigration laws were not doing what they needed to do to protect our country. And let's remember why we have borders and why we have immigration laws. First and foremost, they exist as our first line of defense and last line of defense to protect American lives and to protect the jobs of American workers. I testified at that hearing, and in fact, the Clinton administration implemented a program known as CUSA, Citizenship USA, where they ran applications for U.S. citizenship through the process so quickly, it was kind of like, you know what, going through a goose. And when district directors complained about it, they were threatened with being fired. And I know, and this is a little bit of an aside, I know Newt Gingrich, and I know that on the conservative side of the aisle, there are a lot of people that say, boy, those civil servants, we got to fire the bums that don't do their job. What people don't understand is that the reason for civil service protection isn't for the civil servants, but for the American people. We saw it with the IRS. If you allow people in charge of government to be able to reach down into individual offices and threaten to fire people, they will really do some pretty outrageous things out of desperation to keep their jobs. And so the agents complained bitterly. The adjudications officers complained bitterly. They went to internal affairs, which takes a lot of, as we say in Brooklyn, chutzpah, a lot of spine. And they looked at the situation and found tens of thousands of aliens who had been granted citizenship even without their fingerprints coming back. The system has no integrity, and the lack of integrity in the immigration system parallels the lack of integrity to our politicians from both political parties, and I've come to rename the political parties. I hope you like them. I call them the Democrats and the Repugnant Cans. Does that work? Because you see, their goal is to take those campaign contributions that are little more than legalized bribes and do the bidding of the people who write the checks. So they say that we're doing what you want. They spend $1 gazillion. The drones on the border are a great example. I was on with Neil Cavuto one day, and Neil said to me, you know, there's fewer arrests along the Mexican border by the Border Patrol, so that means there's fewer illegal aliens present in the United States. And I said, look, Neil, trying to figure out how many illegal aliens are present in our country based on Border Patrol arrests is kind of like trying to take attendance by asking people not present to raise their hands. It doesn't work. But I said it's a lot more than the Mexican border. And he said, well, we have drones on the border. I said, those drones are next to worthless. I said, I would rather put up helicopters with armed Border Patrol agents on board. If an agent is in trouble on the ground, the chopper can land, back up the agent, and protect that agent. If there's a bunch of illegal aliens, the chopper can land and help to make arrests. All that drones can do is take pictures. By the time I got home, I had an email from a Border Patrol pilot who said to me that when they heard I was going to be on the program, they all got excited and they said, before we go on patrol, let's hear what Cutler has to say. And when I said what I said, he said every patrol agent in that room jumped up and started going crazy because they are so angry. Because do you know that for the price of one drone, you can get 4 helicopters with agents on board? Do you know it takes 17 people to run one drone? Now, there may be a place occasionally to have a drone go up in bad weather. You don't want to risk agents' lives. I agree with that. But why would you opt for drones that can't make arrests over patrol agents on board choppers that can land and make the arrests and protect other agents on the ground? There was a study done by a senator going out the door, Senator Coburn, who looked at the drones. And the GAO came in and did a study. Guess how many arrests have been attributed to the drones? 0. And after the study came out, the Department of Homeland Surrender, as I now call DHS, ordered more drones. But you see, it makes sense if you're a crook. Because the trick is to create the illusion that we're doing what you want. And most people hear drones on the border and they go, yeah, that sounds like the military. But meanwhile, what does it do? It makes certain that nobody gets arrested. You see how it works. When I was on with Lou Dobbs, he asked me one day, as only Lou Dobbs could, Mike Cutler, what do you think of the virtual fence, the Secure Border Initiative Network? And I said, Lou, it's going to do exactly what it's supposed to do. Cost a ton of money and stop virtually nobody. And you know what? The GAO backed me up on that one also. Now the new war cry is, first we're going to secure that border. What border are we talking about? Does anybody know how many border states we have? Thank you. Someone's been reading my stuff. I just know it. We have 50 border states. I wrote an article for Front Page Magazine. I called it Border Security and the Immigration Colander. We're being told that if we plug one hole, and believe me, they're not even talking about plugging the hole, the language will blow you away. It will take 5 to 7 years to gain 90% operational control over high traffic areas. Can you tell me what that means? What's a high traffic area? And what happens when the smugglers move 20 miles in the other direction? This is again designed to fail. This is failure by design, okay? This is malfeasance by our own government. And so it's intentional. And so what they're telling you, well, but let me ask you a question. Supposing I was working in a department store and you said to me, I need a bucket. And I said, okay, here's a colander. I'm going to plug one hole, use it as a bucket. Is there anybody here who's buying that bucket? But isn't that what they're telling us with the Mexican border? You see, any state that lies along the northern and southern borders is a border state. Any state that has access to the tens of thousands of miles of meandering coastline is a border state. Any state that has an international airport is a border state. And the 9/11 Commission, to which I provided testimony, made it clear that virtually all of the terrorists, with a couple of exceptions, because they looked at terrorists over a period of 10 years, they looked at 94 terrorists, almost all of them came through international airports. None of the 9/11 terrorists came through the border, the Mexican border. So why then are we being told, first we're going to secure the border, and then we'll give all the people who are here lawful status? Does that make sense to anybody? No. The Dreamers, okay? Now, you got to love this. I wrote an article for Fox News Latino, and I referred to the program, and I said that what the president calls prosecutorial discretion should really be called prosecutorial deception. Okay? What's the age cutoff for the Dreamers? Anybody know? 31. What's the average age of a terrorist who carries out a violent act? Under 30. But everybody thought, oh, this is kids, children, and we melt. We shrivel up and we fall to our knees. They have to claim they came before they were 15. Now, how long should the interview be? How long do you think the interview is? You optimist. There is no interview. Guess how many field investigations are conducted? Zipperoonie. Now, immigration fraud was identified by the 9/11 Commission as a key factor in the ability of terrorists to enter the United States and embed themselves. Let me read something to you. This comes from the 9/11 Commission staff report on terrorist travel. This was published by the government printing office. This wasn't the Daily Inquirer or some supermarket tabloid. The staff that worked with the commission, these were attorneys and federal agents, I know some of the agents, in fact, went out and said, you know, as much attention as the 9/11 Commission gave to immigration, it wasn't enough. So they wrote their own staff report on terrorist travel. Here's how the preface begins, and it comes very close to the wording in my prepared testimony. Now, this is the first words you see when you get past the index. It is perhaps obvious to state that terrorists cannot plan and carry out attacks in the United States if they are unable to enter the country. You think? The burglar can't steal anything if he can't get past the gates, right? Yet prior to September 11, while there were efforts to enhance border security, no agency of the U.S. government thought of border security as a tool in a counterterrorism arsenal. Indeed, even after 19 hijackers demonstrated the relative ease of obtaining a U.S. visa and gaining admission into the United States, border security still is not considered a cornerstone of national security policy. We believe, for the reasons that we discuss in the following pages, that it must be made one. On 9/11, we had 26 visa waiver countries. Citizens from those countries don't need to get visas before seeking admission into the United States. The 9/11 Commission said, you got to tighten up that process. So the obvious question, boys and girls, how many visa countries, this is like new math. We had 26 then. How many visa waiver countries do we have today? How many? What am I a bit higher? Close, 38. There should be no visa waiver country. However, The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I call them the U.S. Chamber of Horrors, has spent gazillions of dollars, they try to keep that amount of money secret, convincing politicians to keep expanding the visa waiver program. They have partnered with the hotel, hospitality, travel, and manufacturing associations, and they're getting what they want. So I want to know something. How reassuring is it to all of you that the people responsible for room service and hopefully clean linen in the hotel the next time you go on vacation are now making national security decisions for the United States? Think about it. They seem to have forgotten that ISIS and Al-Qaeda have already discovered America. A minor overlook. And by the way, what we're supposed to have as oversight in our government really is overlook, isn't it? They overlook everything. I think we're up to 16 congressional hearings. I wish they had listenings. Now, we talk about immigration fraud, so let's flip to page 47 of that 9/11 Commission staff report on terrorist travel. Once terrorists had entered the United States, their next challenge was to find a way to remain here. Their primary method was immigration fraud. For example, Yusuf and Ajaj concocted bogus political asylum stories when they arrived in the United States. Mahmoud Abu Alima, involved in both the World Trade Center and landmark plots, received temporary residence under the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program, or SAW, after falsely claiming he picked beans in Florida. That was Chucky Baby, Chuck Schumer's pet project. And I confronted him and said, "You don't even have a farm in your district. Why are you doing this?" And he escorted me out of his office. And it kind of shocked me. At the time, my wife was dying of cancer, my first wife, and she knew how important this was. Our son was about a year old. And I basically got tossed out of my congressman's office. And I had just finished working with Senator Al D'Amato. You know, Bill O'Reilly made a big thing about Kate's Law. We're going to make it tough on reentry. Do you know, in the 80s, I worked with Senator D'Amato and a gentleman by the name of Walter Connery, who was the head of investigations in New York, one of my mentors. We convinced D'Amato to go forward and create the Aggravated Felon Reentry Statute, making unlawful reentry by criminal aliens a 20-year felony maximum. Back in the 80s, I made the first arrest in New York of a Dominican drug dealer who thought he was going home. And I said, "Yes, you're going home, but your new home will also have bars." He accused me of lying, so I went to his sentencing. And the judge gave him 5 years. And I said, "Your Honor, can I approach the defendant?" He said, "Why?" I said, "I'm the case agent." He said, "Sure." And I walked up to the guy in the courtroom and I said, "Make believe you're having a nice day." And I said, "And by the way, did I lie?" It was satisfying. Do you know that in 2010, 30% of all federal prosecutions were for reentry by criminal aliens? 1 in 3 prosecutions, basically. And you know what's so cool about it? When you do conspiracy cases, it eats up manpower like it's going out of style. Wiretaps, surveillance, it goes on forever. Do you know how long it takes to put together a case involving reentry of a criminal alien? I could do it in an afternoon and get more jail time for the guy than a conspiracy investigation. Cost effective, gets the bad guy off the street. You see, it's not that the system is broken. The system doesn't have the resources or the desire to do the job. This is like saying the Ferrari that's out of gas needs a new engine. No, it needs a couple of gallons of gasoline. We need the agents to do the job. We need leaders that want the job done. And my gosh, we could solve the problem, but they don't want the problem solved. Just to sew this thing shut for you, this is page 98, same report. Terrorists in the 1990s, as well as the September 11th hijackers, needed to find a way to stay in or embed themselves in the United States if their operational plans were to come to fruition. As already discussed, this could be accomplished legally by marrying an American citizen, achieving temporary worker status, think of the dreamers, folks, or applying for asylum after entering. In many cases, the act of filing for an immigration benefit sufficed to permit the alien to remain in the country until the petition was adjudicated. Now listen to this last sentence. Terrorists were free to conduct surveillance, coordinate operations, obtain and receive funding, go to school and learn English, make contacts in the United States, acquire necessary materials, and execute an attack. And what have we done to address immigration fraud? No, I wish it was nothing. You see, the Dreamer program is a gift to the terrorists. This administration should be getting the MVP awards by ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But understand, it's both parties. It's the repugnant cans as much as the Democrats. And you know, in New York, we had a sanctuary policy in place. And guess who continued it? America's mayor, Mr. Giuliani. In 1986, I physically put a dirtbag by the name of Ronaldo Rayside on an airplane. He had been ordered deported from the United States because of drug convictions. He had had a green card and he blew it. The guy had an extensive violent rap sheet. He came back to the United States, came back to New York, was arrested not once but twice by members of the New York City Police Department, but they were under direct orders of Mayor Giuliani, the prosecutor. You will not contact immigration or else. Because it was a sanctuary city. So the third time he is encountered by a police officer by the name of Robert Machadi, who's 24 years old. His wife is pregnant. And Officer Machadi dies as a result of that encounter. I testified at the murder trial. Mr. Giuliani, Mr. Mayor of America. Okay? It's both parties. So when you think, oh, I'm going to vote for this party or that party, bunk. They are the problem. By accident, I met Police Officer Machadi's daughter. I was in my supermarket. This pretty young girl was opening up a line. I was in a rush to get home because there was snow falling, and I figured I'll get home before the streets turn to a skating rink. And I see this miniature badge, and that's who she was. This is outrageous. And you have police chiefs who are politicians, not police officers. I want you to understand what that means. Ray Kelly, New York City Police Commissioner, he has a book out now. He was the Customs Commissioner. He described Faisal Shahzad, the Times Square bomber, as a classic example of a homegrown terrorist. Faisal Shahzad came to the United States at the age of 20 on a student visa from Pakistan. Could someone tell me how that makes him a homegrown terrorist? And we naturalized him just months before he tried to blow up an SUV in the crossroads of the world, and the judge at sentencing said to him, you just took an oath of citizenship. And he said, yes, it was a false oath. I lied. I hate your country. I hate your freedom. I hate everything about America. They obviously did a thorough investigation into his background. The Tsarnayev Brothers, now this is an amazing story. They get political asylum. We can't go back to Russia. We have credible fear. As soon as we gave them lawful status, what did they do? They went back to Russia. Anybody who could fog a mirror should figure out they lied. But no one figured it out. They do the terrorist attack, and their sister, for a year afterwards, then some, is floating like a butterfly around the United States. And eventually, she threatens to blow up her ex-boyfriend. It seems to be the family business. And then they put her on trial. Can you tell me why she wasn't brought in after the brothers were identified as the terrorists? No, the point is you have probable cause that she committed fraud. The whole family apparently committed fraud. This wasn't low-hanging fruit. I said this to Jeff Sessions, Senator Sessions, when I had the privilege of being with him. He's a hero. I wish he would run for president. And I said to him and Louis Gohmert, another good guy, I did a panel discussion. With them. I write for the David Horowitz Freedom Center, Front Page Magazine. I write for a bunch of websites. And I said to them, I said, this woman wasn't low-hanging fruit. She was fruit in the basket. I mean, what are we doing? I wrote a commentary in 2006 or 2007 about comprehensive reform. I gave it a new name. You know, this idea of giving millions of people identity documents who snuck into the country. Comprehensive reform? Not so much. I came to call it the Terrorist Assistance and Facilitation Act. I'm working on my candor. I don't know if I'm there yet. Well, Senator Sessions liked it so much, he quoted me from the floor of the Senate on 3 separate days and then sent me a certificate to commemorate it. We've got to be outspoken. We've got to arm ourselves with the facts. But you have all the candidates, with the exception of Donald Trump, saying, well, let's secure the border. You just had Ben Carson saying, well, if they're here, we'll give them 6 months to register if they have a pristine record. What pristine record? Who are you going to call up? Ghostbusters? And you know, Chuck Schumer, I keep calling him Chuck the Schmuck, Chuck Schumer, who drives me crazy, went before the cameras and said, you know, the reason we have people trespassing on landmarks like the Brooklyn Bridge and the Manhattan Bridge and the World Trade Center is because the penalty in jail isn't strong enough. We need to make a federal law that if you trespass, you go to jail for 5 years. That's pretty stiff. Wow, I'm impressed. However, when you trespass on America, he thinks you've earned the path to citizenship. Does anyone see a disconnect here? You see, these aren't undocumented immigrants. They are illegal aliens. They are entrants without inspection. And as an agent, if my boss came up to me and said, hey, Mike, who did you arrest? And if I said the guy's an EWI, that answered his question. EWI, entry without inspection, you see? But Jimmy Carter started this game, this Orwellian game, and it's not political correctness. We've got to be so clear about this. I'm politically correct. I curse a lot, I admit it. I'm sorry if I offend people. I won't curse, I promise you. But I always say all those so-called dirty words, if it wasn't for those activities, none of us would be here. So I don't know if they're that bad. I've spent too many years in law enforcement screaming at people. But the N-word is a word my kids have never heard me say. It's verboten. That's the kind of language I have zero tolerance for. So I'm politically correct. This is not about political correctness. This is Orwellian. And George Orwell said that in a time of tyranny, telling the truth was a revolutionary act. This is a time of tyranny. So when we hear this nonsense, they're undocumented immigrants. No, they are trespassers. No, they're illegal aliens. And the term alien is not a pejorative. It simply means any person who is not a citizen or national of the United States. It's a statement of fact. And the biggest problem that the other side has with that word, and I call them the immigration anarchists, by the way, is because it provides clarity to the argument. And when you're a con artist, the last thing you want is clarity. That's why magicians use blue smoke and mirrors, and that's why you don't want to buy a used car in a dark parking lot, because you need to see what's going on, and language illuminates the debate, and that's the last thing that they want is accurate language so they can turn around and say, boy, that bum Mike Cutler is anti-immigrant. No, Mike Cutler is pro-enforcement. Pro-enforcement. And by the way, if you're pro-enforcement, you are pro-immigrant, because this country admits more than 1 million lawful immigrants each and every year. Every year we naturalize more than 500,000 new citizens. How on earth can you be anti-immigrant when you support the very same laws whereby we admit more immigrants than the rest of the world combined? You must never allow your enemies to define you, because I promise you, you will lose. I was going to be a speech instructor in college when I had the opportunity to become a federal agent. It's all about the debate. It's all about the debate. And we need a stand your ground mentality, not about firearms, but about the accusations. I am tired of Americans backing down and apologizing. I did a debate with a professor, and I got to just tell you, and at one point she came to say to me, and I'm giving you the shortened version, your problem, Mr. Cutler, is that your view of the world is Eurocentric. She was from Latin America. And the room was as packed as this room was. It was a university. And my partner, who's a former agent, now has his PhD in sociology, didn't even realize what she had just said, and I just lost it. I grabbed my microphone, stuck my face next to her face with the mic, and just 1 octave below, or 1 decibel below screaming, I said to her, you bigoted racist, how dare you? And, you know, she just stared at me. And I said, how in the world is it Eurocentric is a problem? I didn't criticize you for being born in Peru, but you seem to have a problem with where I came from. And that, young lady, is bigotry. And she said to me, I'm sorry. And I said, well, wait a minute, what exactly are we apologizing for? Let's try to analyze this. Did you open your mouth a little bit too wide and some extra words fell out by accident? I said, those words were carefully selected. They were intended to intimidate me, but you got the wrong guy on the wrong day on the wrong darn venue. And she started crying. I said, will someone give this woman a rag to wipe her face? And you know what was remarkable? The professors came up to me afterwards and said it was refreshing. I said, I will never apologize for allowing my nose to get in the way of someone else's fist. And then we hear this nonsense, and I know Maria is going to agree with me, and it's so great to see you, Maria, and I thank you for your work. But I have to tell you, and I thank Christina also. I should have started out by thanking Christina for her great work. And of course, Lauren Martell. We can go down this whole list here. But when I hear about the Latino vote, I want everybody here to just stop and think about something. Is that not the most despicable form of profiling you've ever heard? The Latino vote? You mean anybody whose last name is Espinoza or Rodriguez or Garcia thinks the same way? Oh, those people. Or the Jews, yeah, the Jewish vote. Or the blacks. I was in this university classroom. There were 15 black kids in the classroom, and I said, well, I know you guys are all studying the same course of study and have the same dreams and aspirations, and you probably all drive the same car, right? Because what else does the black vote mean or the Latino vote mean? I said, this is a disgusting form of profiling, and those people that conduct those polls, which is a cottage industry, should be out of business. I wish they'd sit on their polls and let it penetrate. There's an image. So you have politicians chasing a mythical vote. Did you ever play with a puppy and a flashlight and watch the dog run after the light? Think about John Boehner and those other clowns chasing the light on the floor, but it's the Latino vote. Yes, I'm bad. I really am. But look, we are in a struggle for our survival. And this isn't racism, and it's not bigotry, and if we allow ourselves to be intimidated, we will lose. Okay. What I want everyone to understand about the refugees is the vetting process. That's wherein lies the problem. There was an article 3 days ago about a British journalist who, without even going to Syria, by the way, was able to purchase a Syrian passport that was issued, and a driver's license, and an ID card, all in his name, all on authentic paper, all made on the proper printing press. Because ISIS has overrun government offices in Syria, and they're stealing all the above. And they're using the names of the deceased, so if someone tries to see if it's a real name, they will find out it's a real name. I will tell you that the Russian mob came to New York by claiming to be persecuted Jews, and they weren't Jewish. And this went on for many years. You see, I am sympathetic to refugees in ways that maybe some other people aren't. But we are forgetting that our compassion must start at home first. And what we're seeing with the refugees is the pimple on the backside of an elephant in terms of the magnitude of the problem. But it finally motivated people to start paying attention. You see, instead of debating about whether we should secure the border first, and it's not a first, our military is so effective because we have to do things simultaneously. We have close air support for our troops. When the ground troops move in, the air cover protects them. Otherwise, they walk into a buzzsaw. You can't say to the troops on the ground, head that way, and we'll send the airplanes in a couple of weeks. They won't be there. They'll be dead. They'll be chewed up. And as we've seen with ISIS, sending in air power without ground troops is not effective. We have to look at immigration as a system of many components that all must function simultaneously the way the human body does. You know, you don't take a breath and then hold your breath for 5 weeks while, it's got to happen simultaneously. And we're being lied to by our very own government because there's too much money to be made. And it's also, you look at the H-1B visas, and I know you want to talk about the refugees, but we're bringing in more foreign workers right now every month than the number of new jobs that we are creating. And this is high-tech jobs. And by the way, and I have to make one other point, and then yes, 1 second, Christine, I just got to make this point, bear with me. Because you see, we tend to listen to slogans. And so the new war cry is wage equality. Alan Greenspan addressed wage equality for Chuck. And what it really means is making American workers compete with foreign workers to get rid of the wage premium that they're being paid, because he used the term, you know what the term Greenspan used to describe American high-tech workers? Privileged elite, earning a wage premium that should not be substantiated because they're being shielded from foreign competition. That's what our borders and our laws were supposed to do. The Labor Department used to run immigration. And the money we're losing is hundreds of billions a year in remittances. If we got rid of the money flowing out of the United States, it wouldn't only pay for the enforcement, it would pay down our national debt. And by the way, if you want enough the border is secure, one last point, then I get to you, Christina. If you want enough the border is secure, do you know the metric that nobody can mess around with? The price and availability of heroin. We are in the worst heroin epidemic ever, and in New York State, Governor Cuomo just now allocated $272,000. You know where they're now providing the antidote to heroin overdoses? Public school nurses. So when you hear this nonsense, the border is secure, and it's the same system that they're using to vet these refugees that they want to dump around the United States. I did a drive-along in Minnesota with the sheriffs. I was in the jail cell when Moussaoui, the 20th hijacker, was held. They have enclaves where it's almost impossible to walk in or drive into that area without feeling super uncomfortable. We are developing enclaves in our own country which could quickly degenerate into the no-go zones we've seen in France. And this isn't about bigotry. And when people start telling you you're a bigot, stand up and say, no, this isn't about bigotry. This is about our future. You know, the difference between an illegal alien and an immigrant, for clarity, is comparable to the difference between a house guest and a burglar. And I know Christina is going to throw something at me if I don't. Go ahead, Christina. Well, understand what's happening. If you look at what's happened, we are flooding our schools with kids that can't speak English, that are coming from such a diverse cultural background where education isn't the issue. The Congressional Budget Office said that to educate a child who can't speak English costs over 20% more than to educate a child who can speak English. So resources that should go to kids perhaps with learning disabilities. My youngest son has a form of autism, Asperger's. Because of early intervention, he's now on a full scholarship for City College School of Engineering. I don't want to imagine where he would be now without that money, without that program. We are cutting the funding because of all of this. So it's an either or. Either we take care of our own or we don't. And charity begins at home. This makes no sense. And when we start spending money on welfare and other programs, what we're doing is looting our economy. This is not sustainable. This is not sustainable. But you see, the politicians don't care because they are taking those campaign contributions. You know, I think they need a new position in our government, the official auctioneer. Maybe they can get the guy from the Mecum Auto auction and be done with it. Because we are auctioning off the government. I wrote an article a couple of years ago. I called it The Fencing of America. And I didn't mean a fence as in the fence on the border. In law enforcement, the fence is somebody who sells stolen property. Our politicians, ladies and gentlemen, are fences. They are selling our country out from under us. They're selling us out, and they're selling our country. Christina, is there anything that I missed? Because she's the professor. All right, the solution. We've got to push back. We've got to be very clear with the politicians. You know, what's so gratifying for me to come here and see this room filled with enthusiastic people. And I'll be honest, I mean, yes, there's some older people here, but there's also younger people here. And that's exciting for me because I've gone to meetings with 30 or 35 people and they're over the age of like 85 and 90. And you say, where are the kids? They're going to school. We're running up student loans. Do you know student loans right now amount to more than $1.2 trillion in debt? And when these kids come out of school, they're not getting the jobs because they're competing against India. And do you know when the United States said that we were going to raise the price of the H-1B visas to help pay for border security, allegedly, do you know that India threatened to go to the World Court and sue us? These are not our friends. We right now have 400,000 foreign students studying STEM curricula in the United States. China leading the charge along with India. China is building a nuclear navy. I'd like $1 for every Chinese engineer who got his or her training in the United States. We've educated Iranians, I want you to think about this, in nuclear physics and engineering. We have Quds forces operating in Latin America. Peter King did a hearing about it. But then Peter King turns around and says, well, but we've got to take care of the Dreamers and we've got to have an amnesty. Once they come here, how hard is it for someone to conceal his or her identity? We know that the shock troops from Iran, known as the Quds forces, are in Latin America. There are terror training camps in the tri-border region of Brazil. So the problem is when they come here, we can't verify who they are. They're getting false ID. This is an act of national suicide. And so when people start to, one sec, Laura, I just want to make that one point. So what we're doing now is our government is operating against our own best interest, and it's inexplicable to me. Yes, Laura, and then I'll get to you. Yeah. All right, yeah, let me do that. I'm sorry, you're right. Okay. Here's the question I want you to know. All this talk about how the UN is allowing us to vet them. So here's the questions you want to know. How many times has our government said no to an individual? How many and what's required for us to say no? Can they simply say, I don't like this guy? Or do they have to back it up? No one's answering these questions. How often has it happened? It's like with the Dreamers. You know what the approval rate for Dreamers is? 97%. So do you think anyone's really scrutinizing? I'd like to know what the denial rate is or the rejection rate is, and these are the questions you should be asking the people who are supposed to represent you. How many times in the last year were people destined for the United States turned away by the DHS? Because I'm going to bet you that the answer is going to be close to zero. You see, and so even though the UN claims that we have the right to refuse the people they want to send us, in reality, we've become a rubber stamp. So on paper, yes, you have the right. We just never exercise that right. Do you follow my point? And then I want to know, if you look at the CIA, one sec, I'll get to you. You're next, I promise. The CIA has been very clear. We tried to train rebels in Syria. And it turned out that the people we trained were themselves terrorists and kidnappers and murderers. I don't know if you remember, we authorized a change in status in two of the dead terrorists 6 months after 9/11, Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shehhi. I testified at that hearing. That's the lack of integrity to the system that still exists within the refugee program. We have thousands of Middle Eastern students who've gone missing in the United States with no resources to look for them. When they say that these folks have to stay within a community, who's enforcing that? You see, without the manpower, it doesn't matter what the law says. They can put up a speed limit, but if there's nobody with a radar gun and a summons book, what good does the speed limit do? So who's enforcing the restrictions? Who's making the decisions? How many times were people turned away by the government of the United States and it's stuck? Those are the questions that they're trying desperately not to have to answer. And the trick to this is to keep pushing this issue across the country. The more communities that say no, the more dissension that we raise over the issue, the more they understand we're not going quietly into the night any longer, the more that they may start to think twice. Show up at a congressman's office and say to them, listen, don't worry about me not voting for you. That boat sailed. I'm going to work to get anybody in over you, and I don't care if they take the guy out of a loony bin asylum. You see, they need to understand that they are now facing consequences for what they're doing, and it's got to be personal.
We're going to take
Sure.
10 questions.
Okay. This gentleman has been at it for, let me let him go first. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Mr. Cutler, you have a lot of good information. If this group, if we chipped in $20 apiece and brought some airline tickets to Saudi Arabia, and we found out who was coming into Spartanburg, and we had a sheriff that was ready to meet him at the plane. And we took him off, put him on another plane. Could we send him back ourselves as citizens? What would happen?
You couldn't send them back. We can't deport. See, and this is the one thing that people need to realize. Deportation is only something the federal government can do.
But they're not legal citizens. They're
It doesn't-
forced on us from outside. They're invaders.
No, yeah, well, but I'm.
Do we shoot them?
You're
Come
asking.
on.
You're
I mean,
asking
this is
me.
crazy.
I agree, it's crazy. But you're asking me what can do under the law. It's the immigration authority that's vested in the federal government to decide whether or not to admit foreign nationals into the United States.
Well,
But
we haven't had a say. This is our town. This is our county.
I understand, but you could turn around and say we don't want them to leave the airport once they're admitted unless you drive them out of town. You may be able to do that, but that's something that we have to look at the laws. I'm just telling you that when someone gets off an airplane, if immigration admits them, you can't turn around and say, get back on the airplane. You just can't do that. And they've been admitted. And so you can't, and that's what I'm saying, you can't turn around and say, get back on the airplane. That we won't accept them. Relocate them here. That's the point. But you can't put them on an airplane. You understand my point? When someone has been legally admitted by competent authority, you can't turn around and put the guy.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Hi, thank you.
Yes.
My name is Barbara Rosenthal
Hi,
Wilson. My mother came from Poland. My grandfather was my hero. He escaped Hitler by 4 weeks. If people I've heard on blogs that say, oh, America can't fall, our rules will never change. Oh, that's not true.
No, it's
Poland
not.
changed in 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Yes.
I have in my hand my mother's immigration identification card, 1939. She came on the troop ship from Canada. They converted luxury liners and sent them over to Gdansk, Poland, to the port. My grandfather was my hero. He got tickets and he got out. And then, like you said, Hitler took over his brick-making farm and took over his whole farm and killed some of my relatives as well.
Is there a question?
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Please,
is there a question that you...
Please forgive
All
me.
right, go ahead. Go ahead.
My question is could we use converted, just like Canada had converted ships, to get these people in mass, get them out of here on troop ships?
But you're missing what I'm saying to you. If these people are admitted by immigration authorities, you don't have the right to force them out of the United States. You can turn them away from your county and say, we're not going to accept them here, but you can't move them out of the United States. Do you understand what I'm saying? We can have this argument all night, and you can disagree with me all night, but I'm
Fingerprint
telling
them,
you.
medical examinations like my mom.
Christina. They are creating a threat to national security
Any more
and public
questions?
safety. That's the point.
Question.
The source of this evil is Islam. Why is Islam recognized as a religion under the Constitution when it is political tyranny?
That's a question I don't have a good answer for you. You're getting into an area that I don't have expertise in.
In the Second World War, at the time the Jews were put on some ships and they were shipped over here to America, and we refused to allow them to land.
Yes.
And we shipped them back, and many
Right.
of them
But
died.
that was the federal
Why
government.
can we not do that today?
Okay, because that was the federal government. That was Roosevelt's decision. That wasn't done by sheriffs. That was done by the federal government. The federal government has that authority.
Why are we allowing them to land or
But are
be
you-
in this country?
You're asking me a question that I can't answer. The administration and our Congress needs to answer that question, and we need to ask that question of them.
Over and over and over and
Repeatedly,
over again.
and they
because they're
need to know
all
your voice
traitors.
on the phone, okay? I mean, that's the best I can tell you.
And they're all traitors to us.
And one of the things that we need to tell everybody is Diane Hardy has computers over here. If anybody wants to send an immediate message to your congressman or
At the back?
Diane Hardy
Okay.
can help you do that on your way out. And this did cost a little bit today, so if anybody wants to put any money in the donation jar on the way out,
There's a young lady in the back, I guess, or...
Okay, I just want to say something really quickly. The concern with this, of course,
that was
our heart
okay.
goes out to
hope
some
that
of
was okay.
to these children that we see on the pictures of the media. But the concern of this is it's going through the UN, and that the refugees that go to the UN are not the Christians because they get persecuted there. So if we work through the UN and the State Department, we don't have a say in what we're getting. You know, maybe we would want to look at considering working with Samaritan's Purse or something like that so we can save the Christians. But when we work through I don't trust, we saw with Hillary Clinton, we can't trust our State Department, and that's the beef I have with this. I don't want to work with the State Department on this, and they're getting paid by the head to bring them here, the contractors are, and they even have contractors paid to stifle citizen resistance on this. So that's what you need to know.
Voice. One of the questions that a lot of us in the ladies' room had during break, what is it that Nikki Haley and Trey Gowdy know? Have they signed off on any of this? Okay, so Nikki knew about this and nothing was...
We have any more time? One more. All right, one more.
What are action steps? I mean, if we deny them if we deny them from coming into this area, then all we're doing is pushing them someplace else within this country.
Yes.
What are action steps we can do to stop this process that's going to make them here, we the people?
I agree. I agree with you, and I came all the way from New York because what happens here impacts New York, California, and every other state. We have got to have national policy. That's what I'm trying to get at. This is where we have to change what the federal government is doing so that this stops. And we've got to make certain that we work with other Americans across the country to get them to understand that this is not about compassion. You see, every time we hear the word compassion, we melt. And why does the word compassion not apply to American children or American families? We keep forgetting that.
And if anybody has any questions for Maria, too, and then the gentleman over here, he's been so patient.
Yes.
Let me just do one.
Oh, goodness. Don's a great guy. I hope that was okay.
Anybody?
No, I know.
Sir, first of all, I want to thank you for coming and your knowledge.
Thank you.
Second of all, I want to know one thing. We're talking about our borders being unsecure, which they are. We're talking about all these illegal immigrants and the Syrians and these Muslims coming here. Why are we still allowing, right here in South Carolina, my home, this is the Bible Belt, they're letting them build a brand new mosque here. We have 2 training camps here outside the borders. One of them has over 5,000 of them training with fully automatic weapons, and we are not allowed to shut them down. Most of you folks don't know anything about this, but that's a fact. They're in our own backyard. Don't believe me, do your own research. They're here. Why can't we shut them down and get them out of here? And why can't we stop them from building mosques here? Because this is a Christian nation. We don't believe in a cult. We believe in Jesus Christ.
Well,
The basic question, I think, is how do we shut this refugee program down? That's the question.
I think that's really the bottom line. And again, really the only way that's going to happen is by the federal government stopping the madness. We've got to make certain that communities across the country get hold of the members of the Congress and we force the issue. You know, the turnout we had here, we should be seeing this around the United States. People need to understand this is about not only their future, but their children and their grandchildren's future.
All right, and Maria's going to take about 2 minutes and just kind of wrap up here.
Really quick, y'all. I wish people hadn't left because I can really sense the frustration, and rightly so. What you want to do is exactly what you're doing right now, organizing. I talked to a lady, I think she just walked out, the buses. For example, have a rapid response team ready. Those are people who can drop everything what they're doing so they can actually go and stop the buses. Have a plan. So organize, stay up, educated on what these ladies here, Christine and Lauren and Diane, are all doing, and be able to reach one another through group text, emails, and everything. Lauren here is doing the groundwork on the legislative side. So that works. So once we get the right administration in, then you guys will be ready. You'll be ready to go with the lawsuits and all. So do everything that you're doing right now. Just remember, don't get too frustrated. It's not going to happen overnight.
And also the media.
Mike's been
Make
around.
sure you go after the media and tell them, look, we know you're not telling the truth. There was a time when I might have done 15 interviews a month on TV. You're lucky if you do a couple a year now. They don't want the truth out because too many of them now have multi-language subsidiary networks, and the more people that listen, the more they can charge for airtime. There's too much profit. I mean, we could do a whole thing just on who's profiting.
Well, you know what? They're not. That's a great idea. Don't buy the products, and they're going to report like they want regardless. I have personally boycotted the Houston Chronicle, which is the only paper in Houston, for over a year now. We finally gave one interview, so don't go there for your news. Go ahead. There you
Yeah.
And that's perfect. And look, we have a campaign here. That's exactly how you do this, bit by bit, piece by piece. So maybe you can start a little initiative like that. Yes, ma'am. Okay, well, in Houston, there was a lady who went and saw something on television about the refugees coming into a school, and the government was going to put millions of dollars to renovate the school. She was so angry, and she went there by herself with the sign, and she did have an impact. Rush Limbaugh even mentioned her.
All right, and one other thing that you can tangibly do is to do a Freedom of Information Act on the agencies that are involved. I sent a Freedom of Information Act to Nikki Haley to ask when, the DSS website went up and how it's paid for, and to just try to follow the money. That's something that's really important, and everybody can do that, and you can do that right away. Just contact them and barrage them with the saying no, and just stand up. Be empowered, but we need everybody to do something. And we'll take a couple more questions, and then we'll kind of wrap it up, and people can mingle and still talk. But formally, we're going to close after a couple more questions. What's your question? Yeah.
But I'm going to make a suggestion, though. I think if you're a congressman and they get a mass fax like that, I don't think it has the same impact of somebody individually contacting, because they just say, "Oh, some guy just clicked on a button they're not really committed." But
yeah, we can help you. This is truly grassroots, and this is something that we are just getting started. I think you need to be clear on your language and just say stop, cease and desist, and we'll try to guide you. But in a lot of ways, we're in trouble because people haven't made their own selves aware. I encourage everybody here to do research on your own and find out what you need to do. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question. Yeah, we'll work on that. I mean, I'm personally just working with Michelle right now on the cease and desist letter. I think everybody has that right to go and do a cease and desist letter and do a Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah.
This isn't a simple issue. Oh, yeah.
Lauren, can I do a little encouragement?
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
I want to encourage y'all that right now it seems very difficult and you're frustrated, but know that every move that you make, we are building our little revolution. You know, you are the troops and you're getting better at what you're doing. So organizing and reorganizing and being able to strike together is really important. I think they're all done. Thank you. They can do that. They can do that. Yeah, I told Donna I was talking to you, going to see you today. I don't know how to turn that off. I guess they can't hear. Yeah, so he says hello. So you know him pretty well?
Yeah, oh yeah, sure. But I mean, this is...